All right, if you would open up your Bible. I'm not even going to ask if you have your Bible. You need to have your Bible, so I just assume you do. But open it up to Genesis chapter 6. Yes, we've done it. We went through chapter 5, sort of, last week, and we're almost totally finished with the lineage of Adam, but we are going to bounce back just a little bit into chapter 5 because of the numbers in the family numbers. And I want you to take notice particularly of the number of years in which people were having children. And they were growing up, getting married. And because that's going to play directly into chapter 6. Of course, we know that when the Bible was given to us, each book was given to us as a separate unit. And then over the years, for study purposes, each of those books has been divided into chapters and verses, more separate units. And of course, that was so that it would become easier to study and to memorize, to refer people to specific verses and specific events. And I was sharing with Brother Ross this morning that was both a blessing and a curse, because it made it easier for our study purposes, but it also made it easier for us to cheat. People used to have to study the Bible all the way through. They'd start the book, they'd read the whole book, become familiar with the book, and learn phrases and passages from it, learn the elements of it, and they could tell you right down the line, starting with Genesis, everything that's in the book of Genesis, everything that's in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and so on, because they had to study the whole book. When they added chapters and verses, it made it a lot easier for us to cut corners and to just focus in on certain points. And a lot of times what that leads to is we tend to neglect the rest of it, and we just move on to the things that we want to focus in on. So remember that important element, because we started with verse 1 of chapter 1, and then we worked our way through chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, and chapter 5, and they all interrelate, they interlock. It's part of a single narrative. And the book of Genesis is a single narrative beginning with creation, moving all the way through the family of and the descendants of Abraham. That is important for us to make note of, because then we are going to pick up then at a later time, and we pick up in Exodus, and we follow the story through the flight from Egypt into the Promised Land. And then each book has its set of references, but they all build together. This is one cohesive book from beginning to end, from Genesis 1 to the last verse of Revelation 21, I think, and everything in between. So that is important to know. Now, when we looked at chapter 5, and we saw the birth of Seth and then the implications from his family through the lineage that he left, all the way down till we get to Noah and his three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And that's important too, because they become the characters that we're going to follow in chapters 6, 7, 8, and 9. And so they're going to be the main focal point. But I wanted us to take a look at something here. In chapter 6, verse 1, it says, "It came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them." And this is in reference to the 5 chapters that came before it. And most especially because the most prolific chapter as far as the number of people populating the earth is chapter 5. We saw that Adam lived 930 years, and those were 930 fruitful years. We don't know exactly when Cain and Abel were born, but we do know that there was some time between Abel and Seth, and that Adam had 807 fruit-bearing years after the birth of Seth. No, that's not Adam, that's Seth. But it does say that he bore sons and daughters after the birth of Seth. Let me see if I can back up and find that real quick. If I can't, then you'll have to find that on your own. You can find that on your own. And so down here in 5:30. 5:3. It's a little different, 30, yeah. "And Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness after his own image. And he called him Seth. In the days of Adam, after he begat Seth, were 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters." So those were 800 productive years on Adam's part. "Then Seth begat Enos and lived another 807 years, bearing sons and daughters," bringing sons and daughters into the world. He lived a total of 912 years to Adam's 930. People ask me all the time, do you think those are real years, literal years, today's years, or are they something special? And my answer always is, every time God discusses the subject of time, he uses the same mechanism for time. And the evening and the morning were one day. Now, if God is that picky to make sure that we understand his definition of what a day is, what a year is, then we have no other choice but to believe that God is talking about he is talking about 24-hour literal days, the same days we have. We have 365 days in the year. They had 360. 12 months of 30 days equals 360. And so they were regular years, they were regular days, they were regular months. And so yes, Seth lived 912 literal, actual years. Enos lived 90 years and begat Canaan. Now this is not Canaan of later on with all the A's in it. This is Canaan, which is Cain with an A-N after it. He lived 850 years, or 815 years, and begat sons and daughters after Canaan was born, and he was at the age of 90 when Canaan was born. And we get the idea that Abraham was something special when we looked at the fact that Abraham was 100 and Sarah was 90 when Isaac was born. But as we see, though that might have been special in that day, it is not special in terms of normal life at the beginning before the flood. Okay? I think the floods would make the difference. Canaan lived 70 years and he begat Mahalalel. Right? And then he lived 840 more years producing sons and daughters. That is a whole lot of sons and daughters. Mahalalel begat Jared and lived 830 years, bringing into the world sons and daughters. He lived a total of 895 years. Jared lived to be 162, and then he begat Enoch. Now, Enoch is our special case. He lived 800 years producing sons and daughters. And he lived to a total of 962 years. Jared, Enoch's father, lived 962 years, and he died and left behind a whole lot of sons and daughters. And then Enoch lived 65 years, begat Methuselah, and lived to the age of 300, begat sons and daughters for all of those years. He lived to 365 years of age, and then he didn't die, he was raptured. Then Methuselah lived 187 years and begat Lamech. Lamech lived 187 years, begetting sons and daughters. 969 years in all. Lamech lived 182 years and then begat Noah. That's in verse 29 of chapter 5. He lived 595 years, begetting sons and daughters. And one of those was Noah. Now, all of that I read off rather clumsily, but I read all that off so that you will recognize here in 6:1 that it says, and when men began to multiply on the face of the earth. We just read the multiplication. There were a lot of people on the face of the earth. Some will estimate that there were as many as 1 million at the time of the flood. Some will estimate that there were more. But this is where all those people came from, whose generations then, over the next 10 centuries, are going to lead us to the place where God looks down upon the earth and he sees that the earth is continually sinful, and that every sin known to man, involving not only man but beast, is rampant all over the world, and that the whole of mankind needs to be judged. Now that breaks us into chapter 6, and that's where we're going to leave it for now, and then we'll pick up in 2 weeks.
I got a question.
Sure.
Are you going to deal with 2 and verse 2 and 4 of chapter 6?
Yes.
I'm going to deal with the whole chapter.
Okay. I was going to ask you a question this week about that, since you'll deal with it then.
Okay. About the giants.
Yeah, the sons of God coming. Yeah.
Oh, I intend to tap dance on that.
Okay. All right.